joining us. Today we're talking about personal brain and the art and practice of stress-free productivity, your ability to rise above the mental clutter of your daily tasks so you can focus on what's most important to you and get things done. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you the inventor of getting things done, somebody who I personally consider an extraordinary big thinker, somebody who Fast Company describes as one of the world's most influential leaders on productivity over the past 20 years. He's the author of several books, Getting Things Done, Ready for Anything, Making It All Work, somebody who really needs no introduction. David, I'm going to hand things over to you, and for everyone who's joined us, I'd like to introduce you to David Allen today.
Shelley, thanks a lot. Hi, folks. Delighted to be here. I've been using PersonalBrain for, 2 or 3 years and absolutely love it, so delighted to support these folks and throw in my 2 cents in terms of how I use it and how it works with all this. And they've invited me to give a bit of an overview here of the GTD, or Getting Things Done methodology. My latest book, Making It All Work, was really sort of after all these years of being involved with this work and thousands of hours I spent working with individuals and groups and companies and testing out this model. There's a kind of a simplicity on the other side of complexity, as Oliver Wendell Holmes calls it, that I'm going to share with you here in terms of the very high-level overview of what GTD encompasses. And hopefully I'll also be able to squeeze in some practical tips in terms of what you might do with that. So we all get things done, by the way. And you wouldn't be sitting here, listening and watching to this if you didn't. What I did was really uncover what are the things that we actually do when we do get things done, and especially how do we do it when it's stress-free? Because we've all been in that place where time sort of disappeared, you're in your zone. So all I did was not try to make up some experience that none of us have ever had and, introduce some new technology or some new foreign language. What I did was just say, okay, somehow what happens when we are freed up in our brain and we are fully engaged with what we do? In a way, stress-free is a lie, because as soon as you're getting anything done, there's some level of dissonance or pressure. It's just that there's a positive stress and pressure, and then there's a negative one. So the idea is, how do you stay in the stress-free aspect of that in terms of getting things done? And it actually came down to a couple of simple things. The 2 core ingredients that I really uncovered, sort of after all this time, it's kind of one of those duh factors, and I sit a lot with my own duh factors, like, oh yeah, duh, does seem to work this way. There are really 2 things that if you had enough of both of these things, you don't need any time management or personal organization or any better techniques or tools. You're already on. The first is control. And what I mean by control is you're feeling like, gee, I'm sort of in charge of this ship instead of it sinking and out from under me. So I don't mean by control meaning trying to manipulate the world. That's a big addiction a lot of us have, is trying to over-control things. What I'm really talking about is sort of cooperating with what is and being engaged in a way that I'm in the driver's seat with it. And so control is one big factor. It's a huge one, obviously. But, of course, once I get control of the ship, I stopped it from sinking. I need to make sure it's pointed in the right direction. And that's where perspective or focus comes in. And it turns out that anything that you're doing relative to improving your productivity, improving what you would call time management or personal organization or prioritization, is probably going to include one or more aspects of one or both of these components. But these are actually 2 different things. They're very closely interrelated with each other, because if you're out of control, it's very hard to get perspective. And if you don't have an appropriate perspective, it's very easy to lose control. So they're very tightly tied together. However, if you really wanted to achieve one or the other, there are actually different stages and different tools and techniques for each one of these. And I tried, in my sort of lazy way, I like to get things as simple as possible, but no simpler. And as simple as I could get it, there seemed to be 5 stages of how you get control and 6 horizons of focus. Interestingly, if you map these 2 things together, which I've done in my new book, if you've read that, or, by the way, if you go to gtdiq.com, you'll actually see this matrix and can actually take a little assessment that'll show you where you are on it. One aspect, and this is, again, I make the joke from my old consulting days, you get a 2x2 matrix. I always have a 2x2, so here's mine. So control, this means that if you're on the left-hand side of this box, you got no control. On the right-hand side, you got high control. Then the other aspect or component would be perspective or focus or vision. And, at the bottom you have none. At the top, it's very high. So if you map these 2 together, what do you get? Well, in the bottom left-hand quadrant, no control, no perspective, or low on both of those aspects or factors. That's basically puts you in the victim modality, at least on the negative side of that. You tend to be driven by latest and loudest. And for the most part, and each one of these quadrants, by the way, I'll frame it kind of in the negative because we can, think of it that way. Oftentimes that's the way we experience it. But it also just means we're responding to things we've already put in motion or that have been put in motion around us, or to us. So victim basically means, I've got this stuff in motion. I'm just dealing with what's in front of me, as if you will. Latest and loudest is oftentimes how we go through our day. Now, many of us, as I say, are the victims of our own creativity. So most of you right now, made the agreement to be on this webinar, so you're in a sense responding to something that you earlier on, had a creative idea about. But basically, this is where a lot of people actually are hanging out. They're feeling like, email's overwhelming, everything's too much, they've got too many things to do, they can't focus, so they find themselves in this modality. Now, the very first approach people will tend to take there, and by the way, if you're not falling into this quadrant at least half a dozen times a day, you're probably stale, because it just means oftentimes this is not about your personality, it's about my situation right now. I can come in the morning and be here early and feel like I'm on top of my game, but one phone call can throw me totally out of the loop, whether it's positive or negative, and blow the heck out of what I thought was my organization for the day and my focus for the day, and then I have to regroup. So it's not a negative thing, it just means, okay, that's my situation. Now, the first thing people often do if they're in big victim, feeling like they're really out of control is let's get control of this, and that's probably appropriately the first one to tackle. Now, if you bring in somebody or a situation and you get high control, but you still have no perspective in the bottom right quadrant, then you're going to find yourself in the micromanagement mode. That is too much structure, too many forms, too many things to fill out, too much format, if you will, no flexibility. Too controlled is out of control. So that's where you'll oftentimes have structure or old structure that is no longer viable, an old org chart that hasn't been brought up to date, or you're sitting there trying to get too organized. You've got Excel spreadsheet macros and 14 downloads of all the applications for both your PC and your Mac, and you're trying to integrate them all together, and you are seriously tied in your own knickers and falling down the stairs. So again, that's where you've got high structure, but not necessarily a lot of vision or focus, or it's getting in the way of that. So then if people find themselves, in that modality, they say, wait a minute, I need more risk-taking, I need more vision, we need more big-picture stuff. Then if you bring in somebody who's a big-picture person, and they've got a high perspective in the upper left quadrant but no control, there's your crazy maker. Basically, they're throwing things out of control because they got vision, but they don't have the structure. Obviously, there is a right-hand quadrant up there that is, look, I've got the vision, I have my eye where it needs to be, but I have just as much structure as I need to keep myself in the maximum freedom mode, and that's what we call captain and commander. The trick is, in case I fall out of the captain and commander quadrant, how do I get back there? And so that's where there is a roadmap here. We say, okay, well, do I need more control or do I need more perspective? And again, if any of you go to gtdiq.com, you can take a free assessment and you'll find where it puts you on those markers. The two last senior people that I coached did that assessment. They both wound up in the victim quadrant, which was a bit of an eye-opener to them. But it'll give you some good prescriptions about what to do. So if you wanted to achieve the control and perspective, and by the way, and if you wanted to achieve that in a systematic way, I will suggest there actually is one. And that's what GTD came up with, was the systematic approach. And the biggest improvements in performance are systemic. You can only get so much more motivated or work so much harder, but quite frankly, what you need to do is probably improve your process or your system. So it is possible to actually craft and improve your internal executive system, which will get you that sense of control and that sense of perspective when you need it. And as I said, there are 6 things for perspective and 5 aspects of control. Very simply, the way you get control of anything is the first thing you have to do is you have to capture what is pulling things out of control. In other words, what's not on cruise control. And that'll probably be your best inventory of that is what's on your mind or your team's mind or your company's mind or your family's mind. And you better get that out of your head. So the capture process is a big part of the first aspect of GTD. Write it down. Get it out of your head. Externalize what are the things that you have attention on. Of course, a lot of people write lists down and make Post-its and do all kinds of things externally, but then what they don't do is move to the second stage, which is I need to now decide exactly what that means. So there's a whole clarification process which says, wait a minute, what exactly does this email mean or this note that I wrote down? Do I need to move on it or not? If not, do I need to throw it away, trigger it for a later review, or just file it as reference? If it is something I need to move on, what outcome am I committed to finish about this, and what's the action step I need to take to move it forward? And those are quite simply the very simple but very important and profound questions that you must ask and answer about everything that you have attention on. Once you make that decision, then you need to go to stage 3. Okay, I've decided that this note means I want to call my sister about my mom's birthday, but if I don't call her right then, I then need to organize that in some place that I'll see it appropriately, probably in a place that you'll see when you have a phone and time, like a list called calls. Anyway, organize simply means once I've made decisions about what things mean, I then structure those, or I park them in places that represent that meaning. Now, once I've done all that, I could capture, clarify, and organize everything that's got my attention in my life, but if I don't step back and reflect and review it and keep it current, and also keep the whole inventory in front of me or in some sort of a context, then I'm likely to then be back end driven by latest and loudest out of my psyche. So I need to build in a reflection and a review and an update process. Then, of course, I need to engage. Obviously, I need to get involved in allocating resources. Very simply said, okay, what are you doing right now? Are you on this webinar? Hopefully, given all of you listening and watching this right now, every one of you, the reason you're here is that you've got everything out of your head. You've decided all the next actions and outcomes about what they all mean. You've organized them in appropriate places. You stepped back and reflected on the whole game, and you said, I'm going to do the Personal Brain webinar. Boom, here you are. And the degree to which you have done that is the degree to which you're probably fully engaged in whatever you're doing while you're watching this. The degree you haven't done any of those 5 stages is the degree to which you're doing this as a way to avoid something you should be doing instead of being on this webinar, or it is just the latest and loudest thing that you're dealing with. Now, in order to know whether you should be on this webinar or not, that's where you have to say, yeah, but do you have the appropriate perspective? And we tend to work with people when we coach them and go bottom up here, and there are 6 horizons of our commitments that we identified that are very, very functional and practical to identify what is my inventory of things that I'm committed to or that I have my attention on these various horizons. I'm going to use the altitude analogy here. So down at the most basic level would be the runway. Those are the current actions. So all of us right now sitting at our computer staring at the screen and whatever, that is, we are now taking physical action that probably came from 10,000 feet, some sort of a project. Your project could be I'm researching Personal Brain, or I'm wanting to enhance or research or look into upgrading my own personal systems and research that. So that's a project. The project is more than one-step commitment, or more than one-step outcomes that you're committed to achieve within the next few weeks or months. The reason you have projects and actions, though, is because you have areas of focus and responsibility, like grow yourself professionally, manage your finances, manage commitments and relationships, etc. So that's the 20,000-foot areas of focus and responsibility. That's often your job description, or it would be like a life, sort of management template. Okay, how's my spiritual life? How are my relationships? How's my household? How are my kids? What are the hats I wear out there personally? And you've got commitments at those areas, or you basically have standards in all those areas that you need to maintain. Then, of course, you have, in addition to that, you have 30,000 feet, which is if you want to go somewhere out there 1 to 2 years. Oftentimes it's out past a project. You have projects because you want to get somewhere. You've got some sort of a goal or a larger objective. Your organizational plans would be at that level. And those are often driven by the fact that you have a vision. Hey, in my life 3 to 4 or 5 years from now, here's what I want to be doing. Here's what my lifestyle is going to be like. Here's what I want to accomplish. Or here's where our company is going to be in the long term. Here's what we want to be when we grow up, et cetera. And all of that is driven by your basic purpose. Why am I here? What is the purpose of our company? What is the basic intention that's got this thing moving to begin with and even engaged to begin with? And, by the way, what are the core values that I have or that our organization has that needs to maintain? So all this stuff is in alignment with that. Now, all that said, obviously, if to have the appropriate perspective, you know why you're here, what your core values are, what your vision of success would look like in the long term, what are the shorter term things you need to accomplish. You got all that nailed. You've looked across all the aspects of your life so that you know your engine's going to be running smoothly. And out of all that, you've identified the 30 to 100 projects most people have about moving those things forward or getting those things complete or handling those, getting those up to standards, out of which you then have 150 to 200 next physical things you need to do to move all of those things to closure and completion. So that being said, if you have all that clear, and quite frankly, I don't know anybody who has every one of those inventories fully laid out, fully current, because even when you do, if you get all that so aligned, you're going to get so jazzed and enthused, you go out and create all kinds of stuff that'll blow the heck out of those inventories, and you're going to have to refresh them, on a constant basis anyway. So basically, those are the aspects, those two aspects of control and perspective. My book, Getting Things Done, actually explores that in a good bit of tactical detail. Okay, how do I collect? How do I then process? What is that process? How do I organize those things? What are some of the tips and tricks about how I do that? How do I build in the review process to all those things? And then, make priority decisions about how do I choose what to do. Now that was, Shelley, how about 15 minutes of 63 and a half years?
Right. Not bad.
The steam pot has now boiled down to the very tiniest little reduction of what all that means. But hopefully that gives some perspective, at least at a top level, of what this is about, and that it's about very real things that we're all very involved in and that we all probably have some improvement opportunities about.
Great. Thanks, David. And in terms of, you mentioned there was a test to find out what quadrant. We had several people in the Q&A panel ask what the URL is for that particular test so they can figure out whether they're the victim or the captain commander. Can you just repeat that URL for the benefit of all the attendees?
Yeah, GTD IQ as
okay.
an IQ test. It's gtdiq.com.